Okay, welcome to Insect Apocalypse, what is really happening, why it matters, and how natural areas managers can help. I'm Kate from NAA, Communications and Outreach. And we are really, really lucky to have with us again today Scott Hoffman Black of the Xerces Society. We're very grateful that he spends as much time with us as he does. And we love to have him here. So I'm going to start in. We're going to do a short spiel, give you an idea of some of the events that are coming up for NAA that are related to this. Over to Scott. So here we go. Obviously we're in the Natural Areas Association. Many of you know us already. If you do not, we really ask that you go to our website and take a look and get more information about who we are and what we do. We've been around for a very long time. We have a history of more than 40 years, both with our conference and our organization. And we are entirely focused. Our mission is entirely about supporting the people in the natural areas community, specifically natural areas practitioners. So we are here for people like you. You can get a little bit more information about what we do here and obviously online as well. And we urge anyone who is not a member, obviously that's our bread and butter. We would really love for you to become members of NAA. You also receive the Natural Areas Journal, which is very much worth it. So I wanted to mention that we have a couple of webinars coming up soon. We don't have exact dates for them yet, but we should be able to announce them very, very soon. And we're excited to sort of start a couple of them that are on emerging pathogens and invasive species. So we're going to have one on the emerging beach leaf disease. Who's heard of the beach leaf disease? You can chat to me and tell me if you've heard of it. We've got people raising their hands. We're going to use chat, everybody, to ask and answer. Sorry, I misled you by raising my hand, though. Very excited to have that. We actually have one of the original writers of the landmark paper who's going to be talking about beach leaf disease and its spread and kind of some of the interesting stuff about it and awful stuff about it. And we're also going to be having one on the lanternfly. And this isn't your typical lanternfly webinar. This is going to be more in depth. It's going to be more focused on natural areas managers. And we've got a great speaker from the extension for that. And we're very grateful to have her with us. Yeah, a lot of people, it looks like, have heard of beach leaf. Very upsetting. So just one more thing and we'll get started. Many of you may already know that our Natural Areas Conference is coming up in October. It's going to be in Pittsburgh. We're very excited because we are, our headquarters is near Pittsburgh. And we're also excited because this is about an intersection of that are really dear to, I'm sure, many of your hearts, which is how water and land influence each other, how the quality of water and land impact each other. That's the theme of our conference this year. I've listed a few of the symposia that you can expect there. Obviously, we have ID and pre-conference workshops. Our field workshops are going to be amazing. And we do have scholarships for anyone from Pennsylvania. So if you are from Pennsylvania and interested in that scholarship, we urge you to go to our website and check it out and find out more about it. Okay. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Scott, and he's going to throw up his slides, and we're going to get started here. And again, thank you to Xerces Society and Scott for being here today.
Great. Thank you, Kate. I so much appreciate it. I'm going to go to slideshow mode here and get started. Kate, I just want to make sure that you can see that and you can hear me before I start.
I can see you and hear you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming today. I'm going to speak on insect apocalypse, what's really happening, why it matters, and how natural area managers can help. There were certainly a lot of questions that came up in the chat before we started, and I will try to get to as many of them as possible. This is a topic that really you could speak on for days, and I have about 50 minutes, so we're going to cover as much as possible. For those of you who have been in one of my webinars or one of my talks, you know that I like to do my thank yous up front. I believe that making sure I thank all of the people that help me is really important, and I hate to truncate it at the end. So first, thank you to the Natural Areas Association for sponsoring this webinar, for being interested in this topic, and also thanks so much to all of you for coming today. I always like to thank my wife and kids. They both inspire and empower me to do my job. I would not be where I am without them. And they'll go out and get geeky with me. This is a few years ago at the start of the full eclipse here in Oregon with our funny goggles. So they're also a lot of fun. I'd like to thank our many Xerces Society members, the many scientists we work with around the world. We are a science-based organization, and hence working with scientists is key to our success. The many federal, state, and local agencies that partner with us, the many, many hundreds of farmers that work with us on habitat projects, the companies and the private foundations that support our work, and the many thousands of citizen scientists and other everyday people that are out making a difference for invertebrates. I do want to give a shout out, both think about becoming a member of the Natural Areas Association. If you're not, Kate is correct that the journal is excellent. You also, if you're interested, please think about becoming a member of the Xerces Society. We cannot continue to do our work without the support of a broad base of donors. With us, you don't get a journal, but you do get our magazine twice a year. And then I would like to thank our incredible staff here at the Xerces Society. They are out on the front lines of invertebrate conservation every day, educating people, working on habitat projects, and much, much more. So I want to point out that this talk is partially based on a paper that we have in press in Conservation in Practice called Declines in Insect Abundance and Diversity, We Know Enough to Act Now. And I want to thank my co-authors, Matt Forrester from the University of Nevada, Reno, and Emma Pelton from here at the Xerces Society. This was a really great paper to work on with the two of them. I'd also like to thank all of the others that commented and helped us on the manuscript. So I know there are a lot of people on, and so there might be some that have never heard of the Xerces Society. The Xerces Society conducts education, conservation, research, and advocacy to protect invertebrates and their habitat. And it's a funny name, the Xerces Society, but it's an apt name. We're named after the first butterfly to go extinct due to humans, the Xerces blue, or the first butterfly in North America anyway. As San Francisco expanded in the 1940s, the last of the Xerces blue habitat was built upon, and that butterfly went extinct. Robert Michael Pyle felt that that was an apt name for an organization that would go on to protect everything from butterflies to tiger beetles, from freshwater mussels to bumblebees. We work through a few platforms to do our conservation work. First, working with public agencies and private landowners, we work to understand the habitat and management needs for rare and at-risk vertebrates, for groups like pollinators or butterflies or freshwater mussels or tiger beetles, because you really can't conserve these animals successfully unless you understand them. You understand the life history, you understand management issues, you understand threats. So our first work is to really understand what we're trying to protect. We also harness thousands of citizens to help us get data so that we can better understand and protect these animals through community science approaches. Bumblebee Watch, Monarch Thanksgiving Counts, Pond Watch, Western Milkweed Mapper, all help us get data so that we can do our work. They also really empower the community, people, everyday people who are out there, whether you're a natural areas manager or a backyard gardener, and it can inspire folks to take action for these animals. I just put this up here because I look pretty good in a suit there. Maybe a couple of you are laughing. Now, the Xerces Society is a science-based organization, but we focus on policy and advocacy as well. I have always pointed out who better to help set policies on conservation than the scientists that are actually working on the issue, and who better to advocate for protections for the most rare species than the people that are out there actually helping to conserve them. So we believe that policy and advocacy is an important part of our work. Of course, outreach and education is also a key part of our work. We've reached over 100,000 people across many countries since 2008. And this is a key to getting folks to take the action that we need to really step up. These are big issues, and we need a lot of people taking action on them. And then last, but certainly a key to our work, is actually protection of species and support of them through habitat restoration. We've protected and restored 1.5 million acres for rare and at-risk invertebrates, and helped restore with partners over 900,000 acres of habitat, mostly for pollinators, but also for other beneficial insects. So today, I'm going to break this talk up into 4 parts. Hopefully it'll get at a lot of your questions, but each of these parts is, I've only got enough time in some ways to scratch the surface. But the importance of invertebrates, basically why care. Are invertebrates really endangered? And we've heard a lot of talk about insect apocalypse. Is that really happening? Threats to invertebrates, and specifically what natural area managers can start to do to help these animals. So why care about these animals? Why should we step up to make sure that the world takes action for the little things like bees, butterflies, freshwater mussels, tiger beetles? Well, first I want to point out that insects and their allies represent the vast majority of described animal species on the planet. If you look at this pictograph, you can see up in the right hand, or up in the left hand top corner, a very small figure of a bear, and that denotes all of the mammals, the few thousand species of mammals that have been described. And then over to the right, you can see that very large beetle, which denotes the over 1 million species of insects that have so far been described. Then you add the crustaceans, the mollusks, the annelids, and you can see that by far diversity is dominated by the invertebrate groups. And why is that important? Well, because we have so many species, and because they've radiated out into all ecosystems and most niches, invertebrates, insects and their allies really are everywhere and are driving systems. What's even more astounding is what we don't know. This is from a paper a few years ago, so they actually didn't even have quite 1 million insects identified. We have a few more than just over 1 million insects. But at that point, they estimated that up to 8 million insects had yet to be discovered and identified. You add to that, again, crustaceans, mollusks, arachnids, and we have a lot of unknowns out there. But this just adds to the point that diversity in the world is dominated by invertebrate groups. Also, invertebrates are the heavyweights of the planet. You don't really think about that. Insects are small, often diminutive. We don't see them often. Yet in studies on biomass, insects often dominate ecosystems. The graph here is from a study in Costa Rica showing that over 90% of the animals in this rainforest are invertebrates. So less than 10% are the monkeys, the birds, the other mammals that are in this rainforest, and 90% of the animal biomass out there are invertebrates. And that's not just in rainforests. Vox, which is a really interesting publication at times, had a really neat little article, All Life on Earth in One Staggering Chart. And they broke things up into gigatons. A gigaton is equal to 1 billion metric tons of carbon. This is just part of the chart. And you can see that they've estimated that 1 gigaton, that arthropods make up 1 gigaton of carbon, whereas humans only make up 0.06 gigatons of carbon. So invertebrates and their allies really are both in diversity as well as in biomass, the drivers of the planet. Why does that matter? Well, because there are so many species and so many niches, and there are so many individuals that make up so much biomass, they perform ecosystem services, both in terrestrial, aquatic, as well as in marine systems. And I do want to point out today, I'm interchanging invertebrates a bit with insects. You know, insects and their allies I will use, but sometimes the data that I have is specific to certain insects, sometimes to invertebrates, and so I do go back and forth. So I'm talking about any animal that doesn't have a backbone. Invertebrates help decompose over 90% of human and animal waste. Our bigger invertebrates, our macroinvertebrates, are the first line of breaking down that plant and animal waste. It'd be a different world without the detritivores. Invertebrates are part of nearly every food chain. 96% of songbirds rear their young on insects. 96%. A different world if they didn't have these insects to raise their young on. Aquatic macroinvertebrates are vital for most fish species. Actually, small flies, midges, are the most important food source for juvenile salmon. Without these small flies in upper stream reaches, these salmon would never have the protein to make it to the ocean. Grizzly bears. I like to point out some of the biggest mammals because they really do rely on insects. You know, grizzly bears generally eat salmon, which rely on insects, and they eat berries, which rely on insects for pollination. Some grizzly bears actually eat insects, and that's one of the reasons why I like to point this out. There are a group of grizzly bears that congregate each year near Yellowstone to eat thousands of miller moths. Some of them will eat 30 to 40,000 miller moths, making up a quarter to a third of their caloric intake. These are like little lipid sacks, basically, little protein packages. And I can't imagine they taste good, but they certainly seem to work for the grizzly bears. Of course, you've seen these slides before, and I will quickly go through them, but pollination is vital to Earth to planet Earth. 85% of flowering plants require an animal, mostly an insect, to move pollen. This is important for us. 1/3 of crop production comes from pollination, mostly by insects. These are the most vitamin and mineral rich foods. And they worth a lot of money, $217 billion in a worldwide estimate. They're not just important for us. The fruits and seeds of pollination are a major part of the diet of many mammals, as I pointed out, grizzly bears and berries. Invertebrates, insects and their allies, can also be directly important to us. Lots of technology, medicines, have come from the study of insects and other invertebrates. A powerful painkiller was recently developed from this cone snail, and this painkiller may be an alternative to some of the opioids that are out there, is what I've been reading. And these animals can also really help us understand the systems that we work in. You know, butterflies and pollinators for terrestrial flowering systems, aquatic macroinvertebrates to understand streams, the snails and slugs in old growth forests. All of these can help us to better manage the landscapes that we care about. I do want to point out that many of these animals could be considered either umbrella species or keystone species. You know, freshwater invertebrates are vital components of food webs and essential for the maintenance of healthy waterways. These right here are freshwater mussels, which really are astounding in what they provide to streams. They benefit fish by improving habitat conditions and improving the beds for macroinvertebrates, which these fish eat on. They're sustenance for a whole variety of birds and mammals. They clean our water, and they can be bioindicators because they're really long-lived, and you can study them over time for changes in these stream systems. So these invertebrates, although small, can be really, really important for a variety of ecosystem services and direct benefit to us. This is a slide that I often talk about when I am in Washington, D.C., because people like it to bring it back to numbers. You know, in 2006, my colleague Mace Vaughn, who is a pollinator program co-director here, and John Losey, who's a professor at Cornell, did a really interesting paper that showed that the dollar value of services provided by insects for just 4 services, food for wildlife, native insects, pollination, and cleanup of grazing land, was $57 billion. They felt this was a very conservative estimate, even for these 4 services. Think about all of the other services that are not mentioned on here, and then also think about how the economy has gone up since 2006. That number is much higher now. So I know there's been a lot of interest in insects and other invertebrate die-offs. You know, we've had articles in major newspapers, you know, with the title Insect Apocalypse. You know, words like catastrophe and crisis have been thrown out. And I did title my talk Insect Apocalypse with a question mark for a reason. Because using words like that really are not really that helpful. Apocalypse doesn't have a good definition. It's really actually a biblical term, and it does get people's attention. But what I hope to do today is to run through what we know about decline in diversity and abundance and biomass of insects and other groups of invertebrates so that we can all be on the same page, so we can understand this issue and then take the next step, which I hope and I believe we really do have enough information that we should start taking action now. So why am I showing you a car? Well, this is a great car, by the way. This is a 1971 Mach 1 Mustang. This was my car. I grew up in the last gasp of the muscle car, and when I was a young man, I would drive way too fast along Nebraska roads, usually more back roads, back highways, so I could go fast. And this car was my pride and joy. I will apologize right now for my impact to the climate at that time, but at that time, that is not what I was thinking about. What I was thinking about is having a cool, shiny car, and I would wash my car all of the time. My car was always covered in insects, and insect guts are very hard to clean. So I would be washing it all of the time. I went back and have been back many times to these same roads, driving along, sometimes with my family, sometimes for work, in much more fuel efficient cars. And really, in the early 2000s, And up into the mid-2000s, I really started to notice that I was not seeing the insects splatter on my windshield. Many, many other scientists and researchers thought they started to notice the same thing. From all over the world, people were saying we're seeing less insects out there, and one way we can think we can tell is because of the insects hitting our cars. Now, people started talking about the windshield effect, including me. But we have to be a little careful about human perception, because there's no data for the windshield effect. I think it is important to not discount people when they are seeing what they think are changes to the environment. But we do need to be a little careful, and we do need to look at what actual data is out there. Now, although less than 1% of described invertebrate species have been assessed, and that's an important to point out, it would be impossible to assess all of the invertebrates with well over 1 million species already identified, and then all of the unknowns. So we have a pretty small snapshot of invertebrate assessment. But what is interesting that I find and disconcerting is that although we've assessed less than 1%, approximately 40% of those that have been assessed are considered threatened. And we're not cherry picking, or folks are not really cherry picking to try to assess the most threatened groups. And so I think these are really important data points. We do have less than 1%, but the information we have certainly shows that the groups we've studied are in decline. Now, many people have entered into the insect issue through pollinators, and certainly we have many studies on both managed and wild pollinators and the decline. I think interestingly, 2006 with colony collapse disorder, many of us had already been seeing what we thought were native declines in insect, through maybe the windshield effect. And then to see an animal that is that well documented, to see the declines are probably losses, is how I should point it out, losses of hives every year, which seem to correspond with what we were seeing. Since then, we've got more and more data showing that insect pollinators seem to be declining and are in trouble. But we still don't even know a lot about insects. There are over 3,600 species of bees in North America alone. And it is very difficult to study these diverse faunas. But we can look at certain groups, and I think we can tell a lot from some of these groups. So there are 57 species of bumblebees in Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And the Xerces Society worked with a lot of researchers through the auspices of the International Union for Conservation of Nature to assess bumblebees in North America. And Rich Hatfield here at the Xerces Society led that effort. And him and his colleagues found that 28% of North American bumblebees could be considered threatened. And 41% of bumblebees in Mesoamerica meet the same criteria. Other researchers in Europe found that 23.5% of bumblebees are in those threatened categories. And this is epitomized by decline of the rusty patch bumblebee. This species has declined by over 90% across its range. This was one of the most common bumblebees that you would have found in the upper Midwest and into the Northeast. And it is now gone from large stretches of its former range. And this, unfortunately, became the first bee in the continental US to be protected under the Endangered Species Act. And I say that unfortunately because although it deserved protection, it needed protection, and we're happy that it now has ESA protection. It's really unfortunate that we've gotten to a place where broadly distributed species like the rusty patch need to be protected this way. Butterflies are another group that is relatively well studied. probably the most studied and monitored group of invertebrate animals on the planet. And unfortunately, across the board, studies are showing declines in species groups. In the UK, a 10-year trend show that 52% of butterfly species have declined in abundance, and 47% of butterfly geographic ranges in the same regions have also been reduced. A monitoring program in Flanders, which is in Belgium, found that 19 of the original 64 indigenous species have been extirpated. We all know about the monarch butterfly, and it was great to see a positive trend this last year for the monarch butterfly. But even with the numbers this year, it's still, the populations in the East are much lower than they were in the 1990s, 2/3 lower. And in the West, we're seeing something much worse. Emma Pelton, who manages our monarch program, has a new paper out that shows that, or in press, that shows that monarchs in the West have declined by over 99% at overwintering sites in California. NatureServe, a wonderful organization that does assessments, has assessed 636 butterfly species in the US and Canada and found that 19% are at risk. I do want to point out that I'm going to really depress you here as I go through all of this data, but I do believe there are solutions, and I will get that. I got to bring you down, I guess, to bring you back up. A summary paper of pollinators and pollinator decline came out a couple of years ago, produced by the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. I was a junior author on one of the chapters, but they estimated that 40% of invertebrate pollinator species may be facing extinction, and that's a big may. But the data we have suggests that a lot of these animals, or at least the ones we've studied, are not doing particularly well. But it's not just pollinator species. Studies have shown that many of our other groups are in even greater imperilment. Approximately 1/3 of tiger beetle species and subspecies in the US are sufficiently rare to be considered threatened or endangered. This was shown in a paper in 2014. Where studied aquatic invertebrate species are in serious decline. Stein et al. Estimated that 43% of stoneflies in the US are in an extinction risk category. And other aquatic invertebrates are doing similarly or poorly or even worse. 65% of species of freshwater mussels are at risk of extinction, 64% of aquatic snails, and 47% of crayfish. So aquatic invertebrates are even worse off than their terrestrial relatives. We're also starting to see, in some cases, reductions in biomass in multi-decadal studies. There have been some studies that have started to show over time fewer animals, fewer weight of animals out at study sites, basically looking at either a group of animals or all of the insects that they can catch. Although I will talk about, at least touch on that some of these studies, are not perfect, I think the overall trend is clear. Everybody probably on this webinar heard about the study in Germany, where they found that total flying insect biomass decreased by more than 70% in 27 years at their study sites. That is a large decline in biomass. Remember that a lot of animals need insects, eat insects. They need them for nutrition and all of those services. We have fewer if biomass is lessened. There was a Puerto Rican study that showed a 10-fold reduction in arthropod biomass over from 76 to 2014. There have been studies showing decline in whole groups in certain areas that I think edge into and can be used to think about biomass. 33% reduction in the abundance of butterflies was observed over 21 years in extensive monitoring in Ohio. 45 years of monitoring across Northern California that found that butterflies are declining at all lower elevation sites, and declines in abundance are occurring in all groups of butterflies. So the studies we have really are showing declines. Now, there have been some criticism of some of these studies. And I think it is important that scientists point out the flaws in studies and point out when and how we can do studies that are rigorous, that provide us the information we need. But I would contend that the overall trend is clear. The studies suggest that diversity, abundance, and biomass of insects and other invertebrates is decreasing. And we do agree with others who've stressed the need for greater investment in basic science and further analysis of the data. As I mentioned, less than 1% of this fauna has been studied, and the more data points we have, the better able we're to understand these issues, and the better able we are to move the conservation envelope. But we believe, the authors of the paper that will come out this week or next week, and by the way, I will send it to the Natural Areas Association when it is out, so that you will all get it. It's our belief that the severity of the reported insect declines is really sufficient to warrant emergency action. I don't care what we call it. We can simply call it a decline in diversity, abundance, and biomass. In the studies that we have, it really suggests we need to take action. I'm going to be fairly brief on the threats to invertebrates, because I think many of you have heard this over and over. And, you know, it's interesting to think that despite the really great diversity of ecologies and life histories, the different regions and habitats, that we're really keep coming back to the same general issues, the primary drivers of insect declines. The most influential factors are habitat loss and degradation. We build on the habitat, we farm on the habitat, we fragment the habitat with invasive species, and this takes away living space for all of the animals that need it. This is not just in terrestrial environments, it's also in aquatic habitats as well. We're doing irreparable harm to the environment. Pesticides certainly are implicated in decline of insects and other invertebrates, and if people tell you otherwise, the data, they don't have the data to support what they're saying. Insecticides kill insects, and we are using more insecticides at this point, and more pesticides also generally across the world than we ever had in human history. And these animals are part of the decline portfolio. Diseases, actually. We love to move animals around the planet. And by moving animals around the planet, we move diseases. Several of our bumblebee species, commercial bumblebees and movement of commercial bumblebees are implicated in their decline, spreading diseases. Monarch butterflies, we should not be moving butterflies around and releasing them at this point. We need to stop the practice of moving animals around and releasing them. And that includes classical biological control. Invasive insects, or insects that have become invasive, either through intentionally introducing them or accidentally, have led to declines in a number of taxa. The 9-spotted lady beetle here has been extirpated from large areas of its range, likely from 2 non-native beetles released for biological control. A parasitoid fly released repeatedly as a biological control is implicated in decline of 4 species of silk moths in New England. A study conducted in Hawaii found that 83% of parasitoid species reared from native moths were former biological control agents. So this practice really does need to stop. We need to stop moving insects around because they are, although sometimes they will work as biocontrol, more often than not, they hit non-target organisms. Things like lights. Lights impact night-flying species like fireflies and moths. The Xerces Society, just so you know, has initiated a firefly conservation campaign. We'll be releasing firefly management guidelines soon. And we'd love to do another webinar for Natural Areas Association on this topic if everybody's interested. But one of the things that natural area managers can do right now is, if you have facilities, if you have lights, is to look at the types of lights you have, look at how many lights you can turn off at night, and look at replacing lights with more environmentally friendly lighting that points to the ground and has less of a footprint across the environment. It's something that all natural area managers should think about implementing if they have lights in their natural areas. You know, there are some site-specific stressors, and I think you've seen enough webinars, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these. But, you know, natural areas often have multiple use, and studies show that the abundance of insects is in direct proportion to intensity of grazing. Overgrazing leads to decline in abundance of the insects on those landscapes. The same with mowing. Excessive mowing reduces wildflower abundance and diversity and can kill insects outright. And we need to move away from consistent mowing along roadsides and in other potential habitat. Forms of recreation. Off-road vehicles can impact habitat for a lot of species, but especially species like tiger beetles that use some of these open habitats where off-road vehicles love to go. You know, some of these issues are really complex. You know, if you look at the bottom 2 pictures, these are sites where martin skipper, a rare butterfly in the Pacific Northwest, lives. You can see the site in the 1950s and the site in the 2000s. In the 1950s, this was open habitat, large meadow areas, and now they're enclosed meadows. Opening these meadows up to allow movement of these butterflies is needed. But some of the management actions, if done improperly, like fire, can also impact these species. And so it's that balance of how do we get these systems back in whack. We now don't have large populations of many of these animals, and we have to think about management for them on a smaller scale. And then I'll just end with climate change. Many of us are thinking about climate change sometimes late at night at 4 in the morning when we wake up. And climate exerts powerful effects on distribution and abundance of animals and is already making changes to species distributions and to the ecosystems they inhabit. And it may get worse. There's a study by Warren et al. It's a modeling study. They modeled different taxa under different climate change scenarios. And with warming to 1.5 C above pre-industrial levels, 6% of invertebrates were estimated to lose at least 50% of their ranges. This increases to 18% at 2 degrees and 49% at 3.2 degrees. So 49% of invertebrates that in this model would lose half of their range if we go up 3 degrees. We need to curb the amount of carbon going in the atmosphere. But that's not what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about natural area managers and what each of you might consider in thinking about managing for invertebrates. And as I said, I don't have the whole day or 2 days it would take to go through a workshop on some of these topics. So I'm going to touch on many, and hopefully I'm happy to have people follow up and get ideas. Our paper points out, though, that if we hope to stem the losses in insect diversity and the services they provide, all of society needs to step up. Homeowners have a role, natural area managers have a role, working lands have a role, and certainly governments have a role. And we lay out ideas for each of these sectors in our paper. But natural areas are really important. Protecting and managing existing habitat is a really essential step if we hope to achieve our goals. And connecting these natural areas is also important because they can act as reservoirs for invertebrate diversities that some other landscapes cannot. I do want to point out again that it is not just terrestrial environments. I know a lot of people are interested in pollinators, vitally important, but we need to think about our aquatic systems. Think back to my slides that show that many at-risk groups are even more imperiled from aquatic systems than they are from terrestrial systems. We need corridors. We need to think about movement across the landscape. We can minimize losses if species have high quality habitat and can move. And we really need to think about stressors. Pesticides, insecticides especially, are a key issue. And they're a difficult issue to discuss, but it's an issue that we have to address in all of our work. Of course, other issues like overgrazing, invasive species, and novel diseases are also important. And then we, as natural area managers, as scientists, as others, we need to remember that we're dealing with uncertainty. But we can and should take action without understanding all of the complexities of species and regional specific drivers of decline. You know, acting on imperfect knowledge is something we do all of the time. You know, in medicine, doctors are often acting on imperfect knowledge, but they make the best diagnosis they can, and they move us towards health without sometimes knowing the proximate cause of the problem. And this is a rational response to reductions of insect abundance and decline. We need to move forward now. We need to learn as we move forward and adjust as we go. But one of the first things that natural area managers need to do, because not all natural area managers do this, maybe many on this webinar or taking this webinar already do, but insects and other invertebrates need to be a goal of your land management. If they're not one of the goals, that's a problem. And I know that land managers are looking at different landscapes or their landscapes in different ways, whether you're looking at maximizing ecosystem function and you're looking at ecosystems and microhabitats and managing those systems, or whether you're doing species-specific management or managing for groups of species like pollinators. Start thinking about insects as part of the management, and go out and as you're looking and working in your system, start to notice the small animals that are in the environment, because you're going to learn a lot. You're going to learn how your management might be impacting them. I think it is time, and I know a lot of you already do this, so please don't take it that I think that no natural area managers are doing any of these things, but it's time that we partner. Managers really should try to bring in researchers, nonprofits, citizen community scientists to better understand the insect fauna that is found both in terrestrial and aquatic habitats. Bio blitzes, surveys. A little bit later, I'll talk about the importance of surveys. They are the front line of almost everything Xerces does. Habitat assessments, things like bumblebee watch. Start to try to understand the animal, all of the animals in your system. And then, I think you may have seen this slide if you've seen some of our talks, but general management of systems is a good way to go. Heterogeneity, generally, diversity in vegetation structure and management can help maximize biodiversity. Thinking about interactions and how these natural forces and the active management, really interact. I bring up drought and grazing. A lot of times we have grazing that never changes. And it doesn't matter whether we've had 10 inches or 2 inches of rain that year. That's a real problem for invertebrate animals. Adaptive management is also going to be really important. Remember, I talked about the unknowns. Management of diverse animals, including insects, requires these active feedback loops. And then sharing knowledge. This is one thing I love about the Natural Areas Association, is the way we're all able to talk and share knowledge. I've got a lot of information, and I think Xerces can really help. But natural area managers are the ones on the ground. They know the impediments, they know what work, and working together, we're going to be much more powerful. But through all of this, understanding the insect communities that you have, both terrestrial, freshwater, aquatic, will help maximize the restoration and management potential. And, often for pollinators, it's restoration, restoration, and restoration, and we need a lot of restoration across the world for these animals. But management can actually hit a bigger footprint for less money. So whether it's grazing, fire, mowing, invasive species removal, or recreation, these can all be done in a way that minimizes impacts. And sometimes maximizes benefits to invertebrate diversity, and they're also often very cost effective. Again, and I may be harping, but we do need to consider restoration and management of streams, rivers, and wetlands, and how these will impact invertebrates. In just a second, I'll talk about a short case study on this. Managers should start thinking about connections across their own landscapes and connections to other landscapes, because this is going to be really important in our new era of climate change. And then I think managers have a really great role in educating the public. Somebody gave up hoping to find out more about how they can work in backyards. Well, we do that all the time. There's tons of resources on our website for helping people maximize biodiversity in their yards. But one of the really neat things about natural areas, whether they're in an urban area, adjacent to an urban area, is that people are coming to it to experience nature. 55% of people live in an urban or suburban space. And these people come to natural areas to learn, to enjoy, to get reinvigorated. And insects can be a great study subject and a great outreach subject to get people involved. Because we need natural area managers, but we need a large cross-section of these 55% that live in these built spaces as well. I'm going to just do a few quick case studies to round this out, because I think case studies can be a really good way to show some site-specific things that you might consider. And knowing I don't have time to go into everything, this seems like a good approach. As noted above, freshwater mussels are in decline across the world, and they're often overlooked in stream management and restoration. Xerces has a major focus on freshwater mussel conservation in the Western U.S. And we approach mussels and mussel conservation through a variety of ways. And this is just a little bit of a snapshot that you could look at this as a way to move forward with almost any invertebrate. First, distribution surveys. How do we understand what's going on with mussels? How do we assess them? How do we know where they are in the landscape to address data gaps and knowledge gaps? And then once you've done that, what are the issues that might affect these animals? Whether it's restoration or some type of management activity that's causing harm, or in this case, The fact that in stream restoration in the Western United States, freshwater mussels are often not considered. Sometimes miles of stream reach will be dewatered to restore these habitats, and nobody surveyed for freshwater mussels. We've seen die-offs of thousands, tens of thousands of mussels in certain reaches because people were trying to restore the river. And in doing so without full knowledge of all the animals, they may be causing more problems, at least in the short term, but often in the long term. Remember that freshwater mussels take a long time to grow. Sometimes they will live for decades. So killing mussels in streams with restoration is really not a good way to go. But my staff, Emily Blevins, Michelle Blackburn, have worked on freshwater mussels for a long time. And Emily, who leads our program, has worked with a lot of people to try to understand how to salvage mussels. We can do stream restoration and move mussels. Then we monitor the impacts of our movement of mussels and the restoration. And then, of course, the associated training, awareness, professional development, and technical assistance. So in this case, we worked in a small stream reach called Johnson Creek, right in the Portland area. And we worked with volunteers as well as staff from Johnson Creek Watershed Council, Crystal Springs Partnership, Portland Parks and Recreation. And we did surveys along the stream reach, especially where stream restoration was going to take place. We then were able to salvage mussels from the areas where the restoration was going to happen. Salvage the mussels before the restoration and move them to safe harbor, usually upstream of the restoration, and replace them in the river. We then monitored the success of the relocation to determine whether mussels survived, and then also looked at the post-restoration monitoring to look at recolonization of those reaches. What we found is that mussels that are relocated using appropriate relocation guidelines, it works. A large percentage of them do survive. Then the education and outreach and technical assistance of this is huge. We provided capacity building to our partners so they could move forward on many of these issues. We increased awareness. We educated a lot of young people who might go on to become mussel conservationists or stream restorationists or whatever. And now they understand that mussels are an important part of this. So the first case study was a stream reach and working in that with freshwater mussels. The second is really a snapshot of a species conservation. This is the Suislaw hairy-necked tiger beetle, a beautiful animal, and it's critically imperiled, only found along the Pacific coast. The hairy-necked tiger beetle inhabits sandy areas around freshwater outflows along the Pacific coast, and because the larvae, you can see that larva down there in its burrow, aren't very mobile. They do get up and move around the surface looking for prey, but they're not highly mobile, which means that disturbances like off-road vehicles or dune management can really cause them harm. Again, as in the first case study, we started with surveys. We worked with a variety of people, and but our surveys weren't hugely fruitful in that we now only know of 17 locations for this animal in Oregon and 2 in Washington. But interestingly, 7 of these sites, of the extant sites, are found on BLM land owned and managed by the Bureau of Land Management. And fascinatingly, or I think really interestingly, this area is occupied by both the snowy plover and the tiger beetle. The beetle may be extant at this site because of management and off-road vehicle restrictions for the plover, which is pretty neat to consider. The management activities to protect the plover actually may be helping, although breaching and other restoration activities do have the potential to crush and kill larvae and kill adults and cause problems. So understanding what habitat tiger beetles are using at the site will allow BLM to tailor management activities to protect the beetle. And that's the goal of a management plan that we developed with the Forest Service, BLM ISP program, and the Coos Bay Bureau of Land Management to develop a management plan for the beetle that takes into account management for snowy plover. And by understanding the life history and habitat needs of both the plover and the beetle, management of these sites can be improved to address multiple conservation issues. Just very quick, because I may be going a tiny bit over time. The last case study is about pollinators, which I know people are interested in. There's good data to suggest that we should be connecting landscapes with climate change. That's important, but just connecting landscapes connects these animals so that they can move. And there's good research to show that linear habitats actually allow species of pollinators to move. Hedgerows, roadsides, other corridors allow these animals to move across the landscape. The Xerces Society is working with multiple partners to make the Central Valley more climate resilient for pollinators. And the goal is to provide corridors for pollinators that incorporate natural areas, farms, urban centers, roadsides into these corridors. And a key part of this is a modeling project that is in process. This is one of the early products of the modeling projects to know where best to potentially place habitat and work with partners to do so. We've developed seed mixes and methods of habitat restoration and land management adapted to climate change. And we've so far created over 20 miles of hedgerow habitat, partnering with General Mills, as well as other companies and numerous farmer partners in the valley. Basically going from this to this. These corridors are multifaceted. They improve water quality. They help pollinators that might pollinate crops. They help a variety of wildlife. But natural areas managers are really key to success. We're working with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the California Department of Wildlife to promote climate resilient restoration and best practices at wildlife refuges in the region. Now, we think that connecting habitats to natural areas that can be these hubs of pollinator diversity is a really good way forward under the scenarios that we're seeing. So in conclusion, just a couple slides. I think the take-home message that I have from the case studies is that partnerships work. Land managers, researchers, nonprofits, working with your neighbors, farmers, local community members on citizen science, they pay off. But coordination and communications are keys to success. One of the things I've seen in some partnerships is that coordination and communication is not the focus. And if it's not the focus, I think you're going to suffer in some of these projects. And all species are worth protecting and preserving. So, I've made the case about ecosystems and how important these animals are. But I also want to just say intrinsically, we should protect these animals. But the current crisis is much larger than individual species and rises to a level of losing key ecological functions. Some of us think intrinsically, but others we need to convince them how important these animals are. But I'm going to end with the good news. We can get really, really sad. And I think there really is a depression that can come on to those of us who work on these issues all the time, because we have so much data coming at us. We have so much information coming at us, and it is mostly negative, at least on a regional, national, and global scale. But the good news is that there's hope, because insects are resilient, and we have established methods of management that can produce positive outcomes. And these positive outcomes can be done in a reasonable time scale. In the paper that I will send out, we have a table that shows some positive outcomes from different land management and ag, in natural areas, in other places where insects are rebounding. So, take what I've said to heart, work on these issues hard, but don't forget to go out and celebrate the small victories. Don't forget to go out and look at what you're doing and look at the animals you're helping, and give yourself something back, because I do think that we can all get into this depression spiral if we're not able to do that. So thank you so much for listening, and I really do very much appreciate your time. I will say, please go to the Xerces Society website if you'd like more information. We have a variety of publications. Most of them are free for everything from homeowners to natural areas managers, working lands. There's a lot of information. Hopefully, we can work with you as we all move forward to address these issues. So thank you.
Scott, do you have time to answer a few questions? We've got,
I do,
but I think some of them have answered as you've gone along, but there definitely are a few that I'm sure people would like to hear more about. I'm just trying to scroll through and see. There's questions about how the side of roadways can be used and what kind of work people are doing there, and also how to explain the value of those kinds of things to lay people.
Yeah, so there's a large amount of information out there on management of roadsides for pollinators and other flower visitors. And if you go to our website, you can go under pollinators and go to roadsides. We help develop guidance for roadside managers and decision makers. So we've got a full status review. We've got a guidelines for decision makers on pollinator conservation, and we have actually guidelines for the people out mowing, really simplified targeted, I should say, guidelines for people out doing land management. Roadsides, there are 17 million acres of roadsides across the country. And I believe, and the data suggests, that they can be really important from an insect conservation point of view. So I think sharing that message that roadsides can be important in their own right. But I think more and more roadsides can also be important because animals need to be able to move across the landscape because of climate change. And we have emerging data that well-managed roadsides can act to help animals move up and down those roadsides. So I think you can honestly tell people these are really important pieces of the landscape puzzle. DOTs are working, departments of transportation, at various levels across the United States, some of them totally stepping up and changing the way they manage, and some of them not so much. So your work in your own state to reach out to the DOT and ask them what they're doing, and maybe push them into doing more is also important.
And I wanted to mention, I've scrolled through many people's questions, and of course there's some that we can still take on, but I think that having seen the Xerces site, probably a lot of the answers to a lot of people's questions are there. And I don't want to steal your thunder, Scott, but Xerces Society has amazing publications, very detailed. They come up with them constantly, guidelines, best practices for almost any of the questions that I've seen sort of in the chat log today. And I think one question just to throw out, Scott, and maybe this can be one of our last, is do you have anything to say about sort of not North America? We talked about Mesoamerica a little bit, South America. What about the rest of the world? I assume this is happening everywhere and that similar measures can be taken across the world.
Yes, we do have less data for other parts of the world, though. So, much of the data for insect decline comes from Europe and North America. But the data we do have in all continents is really showing negative decline. We don't have as much. What we do have in some of these places, like Brazil, we don't have a lot of data on insect decline, but we have data that we're losing rainforest at an incredible rate, and that the loss of rainforest is leading to a terrible loss of species. These are some of the most diverse areas of the world for all species, insects, other invertebrates, birds, and even mammals. But yes, many of the issues are the same. We need high quality habitat. We need corridors where species can move. We need to think about climate change. One thing to think about is that I want to point out is you don't have to start big. Think about the smaller things you do. I mentioned lights around any facilities you have. Start to think about floral resources around those facilities. Start to think about your mowing schedule if you're mowing the sides of roads at your natural area. Start to think about getting people out to start to assess these animals. You don't need to take every step, but take a step and move forward, learn more. But yes, these issues are global, and we need to address them at a global scale.
Okay, and just 2 notes rather than questions. One, I'm going to save the chat log and I'm going to post it on our website in our webinar so that everybody can take a look at the questions and answers here. There's been a lot of really fabulous sharing across people, which has been amazing. If there are particular questions, obviously you can, that you feel like you really didn't get answered and they're not on the Xerces site, I know that Scott can be contacted through Xerces. And last but not least, wait, there was something else.
Well, and I do want to say, please do, if you can't find what you need on our site, go ahead and reach out to me. I may just push you to the appropriate staff person to answer that question, but don't hesitate to reach out if you can't find what you need. That's what we're here for.
And the paper that Scott mentioned that is going to be out shortly will definitely be posted on the NAA site, or we'll at least link to it. That's very important. Obviously, a lot of people commented on it, so we'll make sure to try to get you hooked up there. But obviously, the Xerces site as well will be a great repository of information for that. There will be a video archive of this, and I will try to get it posted as soon as possible. The link should be in your follow-up email for all of you. So, any final words, Scott?
I just want to say thank you, and I want to celebrate you. All of you out there, I'm assuming, are interested in this topic, looking to take action, and that's what we need. We need an all-hands-on-deck approach. We need everybody to step up. So if everybody here, which I know there were a lot of folks on the webinar, take action, we're going to see the benefits of that. So thank you all, and thanks again to the Natural Areas Association for your interest.
Yes, and we thank you too. That's going to wrap it up, guys. We're 13 minutes over as it is. I know so many people had questions. We'll try to, I'm sure that the Xerces Society will be able to handle some of them. So thank you to everybody. We will have more webinars coming soon, and just stay tuned and we'll get this information to you as fast as we ever can. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.